Welcome to the Bean Pod. This episode is on the TARA admissions test, which premiered last year for UCL's courses like computer science and is now set to replace Oxford's TSA and also be used for other UCL courses like social sciences. We've got some great tips to help you navigate this big change in the admissions test. Hope it's useful. Hello, welcome to this podcast on the TARA admissions test. With me today, I have Ryan Ung and Kaushal Agarwal. So hi, thank you for joining us. Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ryan Ung. I'm a Year 13 Malaysian student in College Tuanku Jafar, and I plan on pursuing computer science in the UK.
Okay, great. And Kaushal?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, Emma. My name is Kaushal. I'm currently a finalist studying economics and management at Oxford. I sat the TSA a couple years ago, but lots of that information is going to be transferable to our discussion today on the TARA.
Yeah, and you did a great TSA webinar for us last year.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Beautifully explained how to do it. Yeah, so that's also useful. We'll keep that in our archive as well. All right, so a little bit about the background of this test. As Kaushal was saying, it's actually replacing Oxford's TSA this year. Last year, it replaced the Skills for Tertiary Admissions at UCL. So Ryan, you were part of the first batch to do the TARA. So UCL, you did it for computer science. So UCL is using it also for some of the social science courses, social political science and management courses. They say it's similar to BMAT Section 1, as we'll discuss with Kaushal. It's definitely similar to the TSA, and understanding where they're different, where they're similar is really going to help you. Like the ESAT and the TAMUA, they are run by UAT UK site, which is only at the Pearson's test centres. The deadlines roughly are going to be that you can register from July. I would recommend that you book early so that you get your venue of choice. The first sitting is in October. There'll be 2 days for this test, and that will be for those who are applying to Oxford. Also, if you want to do it early, you can for UCL. And the second sitting for other people who didn't do it in October will be for the UCL students who do it in mid-Jan. And again, there'll be 2 days of that. And so the format is critical thinking, where the score will be 1 to 9. And there are 22 questions, MCQs, you've got 40 minutes. And then there's a problem solving section. Again, 22 MCQs, 40 minutes, with a score of 1 to 9. And then there is an essay. You've got to pick 1 out of 3. There is no score for that, but obviously they look at it and it's 750 words. So we can also see that in some ways it's quite similar to the LNAT in some respects as well. And so maybe that might come in when you're planning to sort of work with LNAT students as well for this TSA. So calculators and dictionaries are not, it says not needed, but they're not used. So you've got to brush up a little bit on your mental maths. I always view my maths as shockingly bad, and I've spent this week doing BMAT and TSA and TARA mock tests. Have to say, I've really enjoyed them because I did the TSA a million moons ago, and I've really enjoyed doing them. And I've been able to handle the maths, and I view my maths as very rusty and very poor. So I think the maths is not really it's not really difficult. It's how you're using it and applying. But I'm sure we'll hear more from our 2 guests as well on that. So really, it's a reminder. Ryan and I were just talking that it's a whole bundle of things that the universities consider. They've got your personal statement, they've got your actual grades, your predicted grades, your reference. For some of these courses, of course, they've got your interview. So it really is a holistic application. So it's important you do well on this because there'll be minimum amounts that you should get above in order to still be in the running. But, don't panic if you think it's gone really badly. That doesn't mean that, you're out of the running for an offer. And like all the admissions tests, I think it's about the skills and how you do it. It's about the strategies that you're using for different types of questions. It's definitely about the speed, because you can't transfer your time left over from one section to another section. So each of those 3 sections you have to do well. And again, this is a long test, and you've got to concentrate and work at speed for a long time. So you need to definitely have stamina as well. So skills, strategies, speed, and stamina. Okay, so that was the quick intro. So let's go to Kaushal and ask, really, you obviously know a lot about the TSA. How similar are the TARA and the TSA?
Yeah, sure, Emma. I've obviously practiced the TSA. I've taught the TSA. I had a chance to look over the TARA when it was launched, and I can safely say they are almost identical in the sense or the feel of the questions, the structure, and also the structure in the writing section. The only sort of minute difference is that in the TARA paper, you answer 44 questions of critical thinking and problem solving. But in TARA, I'm sorry, in the TSA, that was 50. But in terms of the time you get per question, it's exactly the same. It's a minute and around 40 seconds per question. So it's the exact same time pressure, and in many ways, the exact same feel. So a lot of that will be transferable and in many ways helpful, because in terms of the resources you can use to practice, I think it's completely interchangeable. I think all the TSA papers are really fair game.
Yeah, okay, that's true. And so, Ryan, did you find that when you were prepping, did you use the TSA papers to help prep?
I didn't really dive into the TSA. I used other papers like the BMAT, and especially for critical thinking, I used quite a interesting source. I used the SATs, the exams used for the US, and I think these exams were, especially the long passage questions, these were really really similar to the TARA critical thinking questions, and they're quite similar in the way that they have really long passages for you to break down. And if you practice more and more on these questions, it'll kind of build up your skills, the skills needed for you to break down and long thick passages into small keywords for you to digest easier.
Mm. Because they do say that for the critical thinking, they've got 7 types, which is identifying the main conclusion, drawing a conclusion, identifying an assumption, assessing the impact of additional evidence, detecting reasoning errors, matching arguments, and applying principles. So, Kaushal, that's very similar to the TSA, that there's a range of skills there.
Mm-hmm. There's a range of skills. I completely agree, but the concept and approach, I think, is very similar across those 7 dimensions. And what I mean by that is, as Ryan mentioned, what you're going to get is this long passage, which can seem like a huge mountain to climb. But really, fundamentally, all these passages are arguments. And an argument has 2 fundamental blocks: premise, so those are the reasons, and a conclusion, which is, what you want to come out of what you're saying. And all the passages you're going to be given are going to be a collection of reasons and a conclusion. So an argument example could be, Teddy is a dog, all dogs bark, therefore Teddy barks. That's an argument. Of course, this thing you're going to get in the actual Torah is much more complex. But all those questions you said, okay, identify the conclusion or assess the principle or match the argument, all those things relate back to that concept. So in many ways, yes, you should train for all those 7 different things, and the way you do that is by practice. But really, you should get comfortable with the concept and argument, and from there, it's much easier sailing.
Okay, so how should students at this stage where they are now, obviously they're not going to be doing timed past papers and crunching them out because they're not going to be doing the exam till October. So how should they be doing, what activities should they be doing to build up those skills now, sort of gradually, without focusing too much on the actual papers?
I think there are 2 things you can use. Absolutely, you shouldn't use up the papers because these are really precious resources. And again, some students have said, okay, look, I'll do a paper now, but then I'll forget it by the time the exams come around, and then I'll do it again. You're not going to forget. I promise you. You might think you forget, but really, when you answer that paper again, it's going to be somewhere in your mind. Their answer will come, and it'll be like, oh, this is really easy. No, you just remembered. So save the papers. What I would recommend is potentially use, as Ryan mentioned, the SAT, or potential BMAT papers, the loads of BMAT papers, go through one or two to get a feel, an understanding of what they look like, and don't put yourself in a time pressure. Your objective should really be, as I said, to go through each of those critical thinking questions. And what I would recommend is highlight the reasons and the conclusion. So, for example, back to what I said earlier, Teddy is a dog, that's a reason. All dogs bark, that's a reason. Therefore, Teddy barks, that's a conclusion. And so have different colors for reasons and conclusions. And that's going to essentially make you practice identifying those different aspects of an argument. And again, that's just to get a feel of what an argument is. And that's very early days prep. The second thing I would recommend is really starting to read op-eds and news articles. Something you learn in IGCSE English immediately is that the real structure of an op-ed or news article is to start with a problem statement, go through that problem with empirical evidence, and at the end have a solution. In many ways, that's exactly how TARA, TSA, BMAT arguments work. And so by training your mind to start reading these different pieces, you can find these pieces in The Sun, The Star, the FT, The Economist, really anywhere you get your news. You're going to start seeing those things much more clearly. And so when it comes to the exam day, you might have not touched a single TSA paper, a TARA paper you would have, but let's say if you hadn't, it's going to seem more familiar to you. So those are two things I recommend.
Yeah, and actually, given the skills that you use at something like PP or econs and management, you can understand why those are the target skills, because that's what you use all the time in your studies. So Ryan, do you think that was some of the things that you were doing? You were sort of reading newspapers as well. Were you just doing past papers, or were you sort of doing questions slowly, methodically, working through your thought process with them?
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree with Kaushal. And you should definitely read more. You should read more newspapers. You should read just any long text, like any book. And what you should really do, right? By reading, you're trying to build up the skill set to be able to, like I said before, digest very long text. And one very important skill for long text questions, like the critical thinking for TARA, is to really learn how to omit very unnecessary and long details of the text. Like, for example, if a line in the text says, archaeologists Tom and Mary studied a group of 500,000 children on this project, on, let's say, on project A. Your mind should just read that entire sentence as studying children. Try to break everything down into the simplest terms as possible, and so that your mind can digest the very, very long text and get the overall picture of the text, so you can answer your questions. And other than that, that's only for the critical thinking part. But the TARA has two more parts: the problem solving part and the essay. For the problem solving, I used BMAT. Like I said, BMAT. Like Kausha said earlier, you shouldn't really do the TARA mock test too early because you want to save the papers because they're quite limited. But on the other hand, there's a lot of BMAT papers available online. So I think you should personally start with the BMAT. And then if you run out of papers from the BMAT, you could try the ESAT math paper 1, because both of these tests, the BMAT and the ESAT, they're more about they're simpler math that don't require too much thinking. They're more about speed and accuracy. And I think that's what the TARA's math part is about. Like you said earlier, Miss Emma, you tried a few of the TARA's math questions and you didn't think they were too hard, right? But the issue of the TARA's math part is that the questions are not that hard. It's just that there's so many questions for you to try to answer within a short amount of time. And I think that's what really tanked my score as well for my problem solving part of the TARA. So yes, definitely you should try to build up your speed. So what I would recommend is you look at the syllabus of the TARA. So look at the math syllabus of the TARA, the specification. It will say what math skills you need to proceed with the TARA. So I recommend just having a look at that and trying to brush up any skills that you're unsure of. But most of these skills are relatively easy. It will be like ratios, percentages, taxes, interest rates. I think these are relatively simple math topics, but you will need the mental math speed to be able to save a lot of time during the math portion. So what we recommend is trying to train your mental math speed. I personally use a website called ZetaMac. That's ZETAMAC. That's a website to train your mental math speed. And I think that helped me quite a lot from the Tara, because instead of having to calculate what 167 over 800 is in terms of in a decimal, you could instantly just do it in your head, and it'll be much faster, and it'll save you a lot of time. Yeah.
Yep. Certainly, I've got a lot of scribbly bits of paper here because I can't do mental math. But you're right, it would be much faster. One of the things that I learned from the LNAT podcast that we did on this, that both the student and the tutor thought was useful, was to speak out loud as to the logic in a passage. And it's a similar thing. There's a passage, and then there's sort of 5 statements, and you have to manipulate them in some way or pick one for some reason. And they both used a technique of speaking out loud as to the logic of that. And certainly I found that quite helpful. Kaushal, is that something that you've used or seen students doing in the past?
It's not something I've explicitly realized, but I think upon you sort of explaining it, it's something that I can sort of trace back to, how I revise, or not necessarily just the TSA, but just general things. If I think back to how you study for, ICSEs or A levels, a huge recommendation technique is to speak out the material in front of you. And the reason is, if you teach yourself the material, it makes more sense to you because you see the links between them. And so I think in practice, how that would work, and this sort of relates to what Ryan was saying earlier, is that when you get your passage for a question, your objective should be to simplify that passage down to its most simple elements. Much like what Ryan was saying, if you read a complex thing with loads of elements, you should simplify that down to actually, what is this one sentence telling me? And also, the really interesting thing about these passages is they're not going to be sequential. What do I mean by that? I mean that I told you earlier that passages are just reasons and conclusions. It doesn't need to be the way that, the reasons have to follow, chronologically, and then you have a conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion could be the start, and then the reasons can follow. Sometimes I've seen reasons, conclusion, reasons, like a sandwich. And so upon you looking at a piece or a passage, it's always good if you can then say that out in a different way. Because then that ingrains exactly what that thing is telling you, and probably gives you sort of, I can sort of, see why that makes it make more sense. Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, if you applied for a course like yours, Econs and Management, you'd have an interview. So that ability to read through a passage and articulate it, and to say what your logic is and your thinking, is a little bit of interview preparation as well.
Yeah.
Let's think about how you focus on weaker areas. So, Kaushal, do you think it's useful to do lots of different past papers and try work out which type of question you're weaker at? Is that easy to do, or is that just sort of micro, too micro?
So hard, so difficult. I think you have to be very introspective to realize exactly what you're bad at. It's easier to tell whether you're better at problem solving or critical thinking. I think that's sort of the easy division, because the question is very different. And I could tell I was better at critical thinking than problem solving. It gets more difficult when you start splitting the questions in the critical thinking section. I will say, generally from my experience, there tend to be easier-ish and harder-ish critical thinking questions. For example, identifying conclusions tends to be the more simple one, and the more difficult one tends to be the matching arguments case. But no, I think, again, your objective should not be to game the system by focusing on, certain questions you're good at and certain questions you're not. Because think again, you're in an exam and you have less than 2 minutes to answer a question. You shouldn't be spending 20 seconds of those 2 minutes seeing, okay, is this question a matching arguments question or a identifying conclusions question? That's useless time. Your objective should really be to answer everything you can, regardless of whether you're good at it. That changes now when it comes to, okay, this is a problem-solving question. I have 5 minutes left and there are 5 questions left. Then that changes. Then you go, okay, I know I'm better at critical thinking. Those 5 minutes are better used spending time on those critical thinking questions. I can come back to the 2 or 3 problem-solving questions and I can guess. I go back to my TSA. I had 3 questions left at the very end and a minute to go. And I have to guess. But guessing works if you know the skills. But I didn't sit there and was like, okay, I'm bad at problem solving. I'm just not going to answer it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, now they've ring-fenced in the Torah this year.
Yeah.
They're going to ring-fence them. So you've just got to do the problem-solving ones quicker. Yeah. And so let's just think a little bit about the essay. It's very similar to the LNAT essay. In the LNAT podcast, the student was talking about how she'd prepped with a TSA student because they were very similar, and it was good to get different perspectives. Ryan, how did you prepare for the essay and sort of getting some arguments together and structuring them? Because the Torah's quite specific. It asks for 3 things, doesn't it? It asks you to, let me go back up. It asks you to explain what is meant by the statement, give a reasoned argument against, and say to what extent you agree or disagree. Obviously, you must do all 3 of those. How did you prepare for the essay?
I think the main difficulty of the essay is you're trying to generate a lot of ideas in a short amount of time, and you're trying to put that into the given structure. And so what I did was that I went on this website called Random Topic Generator. So it generates a random topic, completely random. It could be about food or I don't know, chickens. And then I would brainstorm for a minute or 2 and write down my ideas in point form, and I'll try to fit that into the Torah structure, or not specifically Torah structure, because trying to fit the topic of chickens into the 3 questions they give you is quite hard. But I'll just try to make a skeleton of my essay and make a solid basic structure, and try to write a full short essay about chickens, for example. And I think that really helped me, especially with the speed of my generation of my ideas and the speed of how I can put all of those ideas into one essay. Yeah.
Okay, so you were writing full essays rather than a few full essays, but plans and ideas and an essay plan. So you're doing full ones. And did you get somebody to mark those and comment on them?
No, I just use ChatGPT. I think ChatGPT is really useful in marking essays, even though it's AI. But I think ChatGPT, like in this day and age, I think ChatGPT has gotten good enough to mark your essays and provide a pretty good feedback on it. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. I'm sure there are teachers as well that are pretty good at doing that as well. I know that the LNAT student really thanked her teacher. So, Kaushal, how have you guided students over the essay? Because that's very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, I have 2 tips. I think the first one, the most important, is structure over style. The most important skill the essay is teaching, or wants to teach students and wants to get from students sitting it, is can the student structure an essay in a logical format that, for example, in a tutorial setting, makes sense to me as a tutor. And so what's a structure? Well, a structure is exactly what an argument is. Sort of things you're going to be reading in your part 1 of your Torah. Those are essentially reasons and conclusions. And your job when you're practicing is to find out what structure works best for you. The most common structure tends to be an introduction, 2 paragraphs where you then go into your points. One of those paragraphs can be sort of the main point. The second paragraph can sort of be the evaluation or the other side of the argument. And then you have conclusion where you restate your main point and say why the other side isn't as valid. That's a typical structure. But there are other structures, and some work better for different scenarios. But my tip really is to get comfortable with a structure you like and practice it in the way that Ryan suggests with random topics. The second sort of tip that I give is to, again, it's reading, but it's really writing on various weird things. I think one of the tips students get given is that they should always choose the non-abstract essay. That doesn't need to be the case. I think what needs to be the case is for you not to feel constrained by an essay choice because it's not your subject. So for example, if you're going for PPE and you see an essay which is more languagey, feel free to, write on the language you want, even if, it doesn't fit your course. Again, it's not about the course. What it's about is whether you can deal with sort of abstract, weird concepts and talk about them in ways that relate to you. So that again, that comes back to structure, but it also comes back to your ability to talk about different things. And how do you talk about different things? Well, it's about your exposure to the news, different books, and perhaps most importantly, talking and debating with people around you. I think the thing that helped lots of my students and people sitting in the TSA when I was doing it was just having conversations about abstract philosophical things with people around you. That sounds weird to say, but I think, one, it's fun. And two, I think you figure out a lot about how you think. And three, I think, going back to your point from earlier, Emma, it's interview prep. And again, I hope you see that, by prepping for the TARA, all these skills, problem solving, critical thinking, writing essays, they all relate back to each other and also to the interview. So really all your prep comes back.
Yeah, it does. And actually prep for when you get to university as well.
Yeah.
Right. So, you'll be a better student. Even if you don't get in, those skills
exactly.
will be helping you at university to be a better student.
100%. I think in life, I'll exit uni. A lot of the content I've learned throughout my life, I'll forget probably in 2-3 years. But the ability to probably structure my thoughts in a way that's more coherent is a skill that will be helpful.
So like so many of these admissions tests, your advice is that you don't prep for these alone, right? This is much better when you've got a group of people discussing these questions.
Yeah, and I think that works with any sort of preparation, really. It's just more fun. But also, I think, especially for some of these questions, I'll admit to myself that sometimes I'll do one of these questions and I'll be like, the mark scheme is just wrong. There's just no way that it's A and not C. And sometimes it's really hard to see why a question is this way. Or alternatively, why you're wrong. You just can't understand what the correct way is. ChatGPT, I'm so jealous. I didn't have AI when I was prepping for this. But sometimes just being next to a person and, coordinating, okay, look, I'll do this test, you do this test, we'll mark it together. Or, hey, let's sit down and let's just talk about this weird essay topic and see dimensions around it. I think, again, maybe it marginally helps compared to working alone, but it certainly makes it more fun. And if it's more fun, you're more likely to do it. So.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely. And so, Ryan, did you work with peers as well in any way?
Yeah, I did. I agree with Kaushal. Working with other people will make the entire process more fun because for me, I don't really like studying. I think studying is quite a hectic thing. And I worked with peers especially for the preparation for my essay and critical thinking part because I think for the problem solving section, the mathy section, I think it's sufficient if you work on your own, just grinding a lot of math questions. I think that works the best personally for me. If you practice a lot and a lot, especially in the math section, the math questions, because what you're trying to do for the problem solving section is you're trying to train your speed. And if you work on your own and you just keep practicing, I think that will work very well. But for the other two sections, the critical thinking part and the essay, it's good. Like Kaushal said, it's good to have very educated conversations. Not educated. Very philosophical conversations with your friends. It's fun, and it also helps with your interview prep and critical thinking and your essay as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, it's also quite a stressful process. So having other people around you who are also going through this that can support you as well. And, you found some great resources and talking to other people and sharing things that you found is also good. Okay, so just Ryan, what do you wish you had known about this exam before you started this whole process?
I wish I started timing my practices earlier because I think that was my downfall in the TARA. So I think the TARA is a speed test. You should try to improve your speed as much as you can. Try to time try to start doing time practices as early as you can. So once you roughly know the format of the exam and start practicing, soon you should start doing time practices. And I did very badly in my problem solving section. Not really very badly, but I did relatively badly there because of how much mental math is involved. And my mental math is pretty slow. So once again, just practice more and more mental math and use ZetaMac, ZETAMEC for your mental arithmetic.
Okay. And Kaushal, what generally do you think students say at the end where they say, "Oh, I wish I'd done this," when they've been prepping?
I think something which is quite funny after some of my students and after I sat my TSA was that the score I got at the very end matched up with my third ever TSA practice. And this is a strange thing with thinking tests, as in you can plateau very quickly. And typically, after you plateau, no matter how much you practice, you won't go down, but you still won't go up. And so, I mean, that was funny. You can stress for months on a test, and really all that prep can be really just confidence, not even like materially improving for you, but just confidence. And so, I think what I would have done and what now I recommend was that the moment I plateaued, I wish I took a step back and said, okay, look, I plateaued. Another paper is not going to marginally improve me. There is something just fundamentally missing in how I approach these questions. I think taking that step back, again, you can say everything in hindsight and it sounds all good. But yeah, I think that would have improved my mark somewhat. I think the way I'll sort of give you a practical way to step back and what that even means is, for example, let's say, problem solving, as Ryan said, is a weak point. Look at why problem solving is a weak point for you. Is it you can't answer these questions in time, or are you getting them wrong? Which are two different things. If you can't answer them in time, that's either a problem with your mental math, arithmetic, or the second issue with these problem solving questions is that fundamentally, as you noticed, Emma, they're not testing how good you are at arithmetic or math. They're testing whether you can omit unimportant information, whether you can zero down on what's actually important. And for me personally, that was what I was missing out. I struggled to zero in and cancel the noise and get to actually what mattered. So yeah, I think, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier, being around people will have different approaches to these questions. And so by seeing another person's approach to a question, you might learn a better way of doing it and therefore help, come over that hump, which keeps you from improving your score. So yeah, just be, I think, conscious that, this test does not forgive you, approaching a hump and not fighting to get over it. You will stay constant no matter how much you practice. It's about being smart about how you prep.
Yeah. That certainly resonates with actually the LNAP, the ESAT, and the TMUA podcasts that we've done. They've all said exactly the same thing, that just churning out more and more past papers without drilling down as to why something is right or why it's wrong, or is there a faster way of doing it, is not really going to help you. And Oxford were doing a webinar about admissions tests a couple of years ago, and they said the same thing about the LNAT. Just paper after paper after paper on the MCQ is not really helping you. And so it's about quality, not quantity, in the work that you're doing here, really examining why something is the answer rather than just more and more past papers on that. Yeah, and then if it's a speed, sort of building up your speed through your mental maths later on. Okay. So I'm seeing so many connections between all these admissions tests, even though they're testing different things. Okay, so do you have any final tips, Ryan, to your juniors who have to do this exam this year?
Okay, I think you should just completely take the day off, like right before the test. So have a fun time right before the test. So don't try to stress yourself out too much. So that's why I did it wrong. So like the day before the test, I was doing so many papers, and I was so stressed. And on the day of the test, when I entered the exam hall, I just felt so bad, like so stressed out. So what I would suggest is you just take the day off before and go see your family and just have a nice talk with them. And other than that, you should also try to learn how to recover after doing harder questions, like regardless of the module of the Tara, so the CT or the problem solving, you should try to, once you encounter a hard question and you take a lot of time on that question, you might feel very defeated after doing the question, saying, "Oh, my time is running out now," and that really stresses you out a lot. So after harder questions, you should try to learn how to reset your mental state so you can proceed to the next question with good efficacy. Yeah, and yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, great. I mean, resilience is always important for everything, for sure. I mean, the day off before the
You
test,
should just try the harder questions, and so eventually on the day of the test, you can be able to just breeze through the questions, even though if it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We kind of lost you. You froze a little bit there, I think now.
Okay.
So yeah, so the sort of taking the day off before the test. I wonder whether you're allowed out of lessons, or did you mean the day off from working on the test, or did you mean no lessons at school?
The day off before the test. Yeah, it's like no lessons. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's up to your school. But certainly, I mean, the idea of not cramming past papers and things the day before and just sort of relax a little bit. And, these are long exams. As you say, they're very tiring. Eating well, having a really good night's sleep, not being up cramming. It's not going to help you cramming this at the last minute. And yeah, and be nice and calm about the whole thing. Get into the exams super early, so you're not stressing about the traffic. All of those little things. Don't eat anything spicy. You don't have time to go to the toilet. So just be mindful of what you eat and drink before you go in. Just everything. I agree with you. Just everything nice and calm and focused as much as you can. Yeah. Okay. Any final tips, Kaushal?
Just perhaps two very tiny practical things. I would say the first one is that anyone can get 100% of the TARA if they had the full day, but you don't. And so have a hard, fast rule that if you go beyond 2 minutes a question, that you move on. I think that's really helpful because, again, there is a tendency for people it's called a sunk cost fallacy, where because you've spent so much time in a question, you feel that if I don't answer it now, all this time's been a waste. But really, no, that's going to hamper you down the road. So for me, I had the rule where if I spent more than 2 minutes on a question, I'd be like, okay, look, I've got to come back to this, I'll move on. And what that does actually is it helps me do the questions that follow quicker because I know I have a question back at the end. So almost it's an extra push. And the second thing actually resonates a lot with what Ryan is saying here. Treat your brain like a muscle. And the best way to train any muscle is to do it regularly. And so really, there's a really long time from now to when you sit your TSA, which is both a benefit and a disadvantage because it's bad because there's so much time you might get gassed out. But if you commit to 15 to 20 minutes a day, which is so little per day, but that stacks up so quickly, by the end of this prep time, your muscle, which is your brain, is going to be incredibly strong. And so commit to those tiny incremental things per day. They can be so small as to, a thing I used to do was sort of like size things. For example, like if I went to a stadium or if I was bored, I would sort of think about, okay, how many people are in the stadium? Or can I count how many cars are on the road right now? And it sort of like tricks your brain into thinking about mathematical things because that was my weak point in a smarter, quicker way. So it's doing those tiny things because at the end of the day, what you want is tiny work which stacks up in an exponential manner. And I promise you, I wish I'd started in April. I didn't, but if I went back in time, I would. And so, yeah. I think just one thing to end with is that, as I think our entire discussion has been, this is actually quite a fun process and it helps for the rest of your life. So treat it like a good experience that with advantages that will last your lifetime.
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree. Actually, that's very similar to what the Oxford law student was saying in the interview podcast that we did, where she was saying she would go around town talking about legal things in the car, and she was saying she was driving her parents mad doing it.
Yeah.
But you say it's kind of like firing on all four cylinders and seeing the world in a way that helps you train your brain ready for that exam. And I think your point about the sunk cost fallacy applies to all of these admissions tests for sure.
Yeah.
And that's something that all of the tutors have said in their advice to people doing whatever the admissions test is that you're doing. So wonderful advice. So Ryan and Kushal, thank you so much. That's really helpful. I'm sure people are concerned that Tara is so new, but you've given us some tips on where to find resources and how to prep for it. So really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Ryan and Kushal.
So glad to be of help. Thank you for having us.
Okay, bye.